and the. And I've tried several times to make classes about these topics unsuccessfully. So my opinion is you have to eventually get the sense of thinking the same way, so that if a native speaker would say it this way, you
Mm-hmm.
have to imitate it. I don't know if that's going to come from a place of imitation where you just try to do exactly what you hear.
Yes.
You actually eventually start to have the same perspective. Uh, but that takes a long time. So that's why I think it's like an art, and you can't explain it like a science.
No, no. Well, I appreciate your input.
Yes.
It's
Mhm.
but it's it's a slow process, and what I didn't realize, I don't want to take up anyone else's time, is like she didn't even know what thin was. Thin, think, thing. She didn't know what thin was. She thought thin was fat.
Interesting.
Yes, very interesting. So we did a little vocabulary, and again, the Spanish came in handy. But I appreciate your input. I don't want to take up anyone else's time.
Yeah, so trouble. I think we can begin, and if anyone wants to wander in, that's fine. All right, so let
Thank
me
you.
see if we can record. Probably I have permissions, so no, we can't record. So let me just send a quick chat to Tammy. One moment. Let's take a look again. Oh,
It looks like you might be recording.
maybe. Oh, it's already recording. That is
Yeah,
terrific.
it's got a little REC up there.
Thank you so much, Carol. So that saves that. We can begin in that case. All right, so let's just type never mind. Okay, so let me screen share. Beautiful. Okay. Can everybody see this PowerPoint?
Yes.
So let's go ahead and begin. Move this out of the way. Awesome. All right, so thank you very much for coming to the 5th of our continuing education workshops. Today we're going to talk about systems of online education, which seems to be the future in a lot of ways. I don't want subtitles. Let me try to X out of this. So they set a trap for me. Can everyone see this? The subtitles on the bottom?
Yeah.
So let's leave that and see what happens. They didn't give me an option to say no.
Oh, forget that.
We'll see what happens. So I'm going to have to focus. So yes, the future will involve a lot of online education, and I think we'll see why. So let's get started. Just to highlight where I'm coming from for this particular topic, I've been doing online teaching for about a year, maybe about 15 months. So, and I was taking business courses at Housatonic recently. During the pandemic, we had to transfer to an online setting. So being in those two places at once, I kind of saw how things would progress, or I could theorize how things would progress. And I hope that can bring a little bit of perspective about how systems of online education might become more prevalent in the future. Let's move forward. So today's game plan, just give me one moment. If it would be ideal if I could turn off the subtitles. Okay. Okay, found it. Beautiful.
Oh, good.
All right. So today's game plan, we're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of traditional education. And I know that's probably a usual scapegoat to attack, that traditional education is not serving us the best way that it could, and that's probably right. It needs to be improved. However, I think if we look at the pros and the cons, we'll see that it really does do a lot for us. But there are new advantages that technology is bringing to us. And one of these technologies is in the internet. And so I want to look at the same format. What are the pros and cons of pure internet education? We'll take a brief stop at cooperative decision making, which I think is an advantage that the internet offers. And finally, we'll talk about what institutions are doing now and what we've done already during this transition period for the literacy volunteers of Southern Connecticut. So let's get started. It seems that there are two titans in current operation as far as where people are getting most of their information. There is the traditional and conventional segment, which we all know, we all went to school, or maybe most of us went to school, I shouldn't presume. And we received our structured education this way. The word I used here is facilitated, because it's a system that we established that we want to work, that the majority of the population basically develops at a pace that produces a result that's good economically, good socially, good for the well-being of the individual. And that's why I say it's facilitated. It's a big system that is supposed to work well. We can analyze how it does that. But it's a big topic these days, and I think there's a lot to say on it. And the second is the internet. So nowadays, everyone is using the internet to retrieve information, especially children, it seems. So a lot of my students online, they're very young, and it's basically a supplement to their academic education where they go to school. They come home and they'll study an additional academic subject in English. I don't know much about mathematics, but I've had students come and their parents scanned a page from a mathematics book and they want me just to read it with their student, which is fine. I can do that. But basically, we're studying more academic subjects, but in the language that the child is trying to learn. Again, if you want to know anything, you can ask Google or you can ask Wikipedia. So it seems that there's information at our fingertips, as they say. And I think that means that a lot of learning won't occur just in school, but also online. So these are two methods that we download information. Let's look at the principal characteristics in terms of their performance. So how are they performing well and how are they performing poorly? Okay, first looking at traditional education, which is pre-internet facilitated learning. I'm not saying that these are the only advantages or disadvantages, but from my perspective, these are the ones that stand out to me. As for advantages of traditional education, the first two items I have are standardizes exposure and standardizes progression, which basically means that there is a target of a core curriculum that is presented to students. And you have your fundamental academic subjects like mathematics, language, in this case we might say English, or language arts, then geography, history, and so on, physical education. This is not divided in any proportion except that there's equal exposure to all these subjects, and we hope, and it seems that it works in a way, we hope that the students absorb some of the information and develop in this equal exposure. Okay, and this progresses at a standard rate also. So if you're a certain age, on average, probably you will be in a certain grade of education. And when you finish that, no matter how much learning has occurred, you move up to the next level. So it basically keeps everyone on the same page as far as what they see, and they see everything. And everyone basically progresses at a even pace. Another benefit is economic. So over the past 100 years, it seems that we can have the parents completely devoting their work week to working. And that requires that the children have, they're taken care of. So they can go to school and be occupied while the parents can work. I know stories of students who did not pay attention much in primary education, so that's K to 12. But when they went to college and they were independent, then they took their academic career seriously and ended up learning everything they needed to learn for their career at that time. So we ask, in that situation, what was the real point of the K to 12 education? Basically, children need to grow and mature. And during that time, probably their experience should be constructive and safe. And that's something that you can achieve with K to 12 education. At the same time, if the students are at school, the parents can work. So it's a huge economic benefit. Finally, I have the expedient, which is that certification establishes credibility. What do I mean? If you can show that you have your GED, your high school diploma, or you can show that you've been trained in a certain software, or you have a degree, it saves you a lot of time as far as proving yourself. Language students know this especially because if you take that language exam and you say, see, I scored a 7, then people know, yes, you can come to university. Yes, you can work at this company, but we don't have to worry about a communication problem. So those are the principal characteristics that stood out to me. As far as disadvantages, that focus on exposure and progression does not necessarily mean that the learning is uniform between individuals. Different people learn different ways. Different people come with different equipment when they start the learning process. And it doesn't, just because you advance as the calendar year changes, doesn't mean that one student on one side of the country is learning at the same rate as another student on another side of the country or within the same school. So it's not really producing a standardized outcome, it's producing a standardized progression and exposure. When I teach how to make a lesson plan for your students, we focus on the objectives. So what goal do you want to accomplish? And then you structure activities to meet that goal. And it seems that the way that education is organized in the United States, I don't know exactly how it is in other countries, but I can say maybe it's similar. It's easiest to build the activities and hope that the goal happens afterwards. I'm not exactly sure if they make a goal for an individual student and they do the exact activities that will produce the result for them. It's probably not practical, honestly. The second item is that it's costly, and I say that in a relative sense. So they talk about how teachers are undercompensated. Probably that reduces costs. But besides that, I think that the primary benefit of education could probably be achieved without having to occupy so much time or to have salaried people facilitating the process. Take the story of Benjamin Franklin. He failed geometry in school. So what he did is he bought the textbook and worked through it at his own pace. Basically, it means that the cost of that knowledge was only the textbook. And I'm sure if we've gone to school, we know that if we worked with the book, probably all the information that we need to know is inside this. We could memorize it, but we work within this system where there's a teacher in front of the board who guides us at a constant pace. Is it necessary? Maybe not. I think it is necessary on a large scale that we have to have a standard, but I'm not saying that it necessarily needs to cost that much, that we actually need to have a salaried person educating each person. But moving on, The third item is that it's slow to adapt. I know from my experience that when I graduated from college, the students who were starting at that time in the same department were learning different things than I was learning. And this shift to focus on computer technology and computer programming happened almost overnight. So I went in and we focused on traditional, in my case it was engineering, so we focused on traditional math and science. But this new tool of computer modeling occurred. And all of a sudden, what I learned is not exactly what's most valuable in the marketplace, which was not a problem. But I'm saying there was that big change very quickly. So in my case, you could say it was fast to adapt. But I think in general, we always talk about how the career readiness of our students is not what we would like it to be. So what they're learning in schools is not exactly what's going to make them, I don't want to say employable, but able to arrange their life in such a way that they meet their own needs and increase their own well-being. So those are my points, but I want to hear what you have to say. Can anyone else think of advantages or disadvantages to traditional education?
Well, I think, I think one of the advantages, at least for me, is being amongst everybody and sharing ideas like in the same room. It's so much more familiar and personable. So,
That's an
I
excellent
mean,
point.
yeah, I mean, that's how I feel.
Yeah,
So-
and for children, I was going to say too, the socialization, they could be homeschooled, but they don't interact with other kids their age. So there's the social aspect.
That is an excellent point.
Yeah.
Let me just make a quick note.
Hmm.
So yes, the socialization experience
Yeah.
is extremely important. On another, to continue with that, when children are young, perhaps they don't have the self-direction to follow an independent program. So this
Right.
traditional education model is especially important for children, for young people who need socialization and who also need structure.
And a little discipline. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
I thank you very much.
Because we could turn you right off, Tim. You know, the click of a button.
It's true.
A
Very
little,
true.
a little difficult to do in a classroom. Yeah, truly.
Yes.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't know if you've already alluded to this, but I think one of the advantages in terms of the standardized progression is also inherently one of the weaknesses as well, because with the standardized progression, it by definition doesn't allow for an individual to learn at their own pace. If they need something different than what the group is doing.
It's an excellent point. Growth rates seem to be natural. If you try to force growth, you might be fitting someone into a mold that's not natural for them, and it will produce an injury, so to speak. In the learning process, that might be an effect on the personality or the memory, that they think, I didn't succeed in math, I must be bad at math, when really there is many, many variables involved, and they were not served for their needs at that time. And if they progressed at the proper pace, they could learn whatever they needed to learn. So yes, thank you very much, Wendy. Just to draw out that point a little bit, in my personal belief, I think anyone can learn anything they need to learn. The potential of the brain is very high. So is your memory. I don't know if it's true, but I've heard that you have enough memory capacity to last you 100 lifetimes. So we ended up dying before our memory is completely full as far as how much information we can store. But this is not a presentation on neuroscience. So maybe that'll come at a later date. Let's continue. Let's look at internet education. So this will be downloading information from the internet and its users. So I looked at this a little more deeply, and in thinking about the advantages, it's basically free. I know there's costs. There's costs for the infrastructure, there's costs for the service, but usually we buy that anyway. It's a resource we're already paying for, and therefore the additional benefit of getting information does not increase the cost of the service. Okay, there's no limit on exposure. So in the traditional education, you see what's in the curriculum. But with internet education, you can go as deep as you want into a subject and see all the places that it connects, all the subjects to which it relates, and keep going deeper and deeper without limit, in effect. If there is a limit, I don't think you can reach it just because of time. So, number 3, there's no constraint on progression. So you can do it at your own pace. When you want to learn something with this resource, you do it as you need it, as you're interested. Whereas it's not a rigid system. If I wanted to learn geometry again, I couldn't enroll in a public school. So I just don't think it's possible. To say, what are you trying to do here? Maybe I could go to a community college and take some business classes. That was one option. But at the same time, probably there's something online. So number 4, it's on the cutting edge of information, so it's fast to adapt. I know before in my example, we talked about an occasion when university education did adapt to new needs in education, but I think that was still slow because the use of computer modeling was known for many decades. So the fact that they transferred then was kind of a little late. I was on one side of it, so when I left, basically that's when they started. But at the same time, it did take a few decades before they really said, well, the most important thing to teach these students, or one of the principal things to teach these students, is computer modeling, and we should really focus on that. However, the internet is basically where information is exchanged, so I think it has everything there is to know except what's proprietary information in a company, or what is the work of a science PhD, in my opinion. Everything else is basically published. Right, so it's connective, which is very interesting. This point I could draw out, but just in brief, it seems that now there's a huge exchange of information and culture between countries, between people from different language backgrounds. We call this process globalization, but it's not a geographic globalization. It might be that globalization will occur, but not necessarily in a geographic sense. It seems that maybe there's a new economy that exists online. There's a new culture that exists online, and we happen to be using English. And that's this connective aspect. So perspectives you wouldn't have seen before are now available to you. Right, and 6, it trains a strong information filter. We'll move past that now because I have a slide on it later. But I think that's one of the benefits that deals with some of the detriments. So let's look at the disadvantages. The information is not standardized. So you really have to ask yourself, yes, there is so much information available on the internet, but it's not all trustworthy. At the same time, if I say, I learned physics from Wikipedia, well, maybe you did. That'd be terrific. But who can verify for you? That goes down to number 6. It's not credible. Even if you can achieve the real results, you still have to have proof when you go in for employment and so on. If you start your own business, maybe not, because your result is, well, look, the business works, but that's not easy. Right, so number 2, I called it the rabbit hole. Everyone knows that when you start watching YouTube, basically it can go on forever. You can watch related video after related video. So I think that's just a distraction factor. We talk about social media taking over our lives. So even if there is a benefit to having this information, it's still a temptation that without balance can drain our time. Right? And it's also surreal. So a lot of the stuff you see there is like kind of crazy. And you're like, wow. Right, so number 3, progression not facilitated by external pressures. So this goes back to Wendy's point. You might have your own pace that you can learn at, but that does require self-discipline. If you have interest, perhaps you will progress naturally. But sometimes interest doesn't exist. There's just perception of a need that I need to learn this in order to better my life. And then you need self-discipline to do it. And without a coach, without a teacher, without a test and a failing grade, maybe there isn't enough drives. There aren't enough drives to actually keep someone consistent that they actually achieve something discrete. You finish physics, for example. So number 4, disruptive environment. I'm sure when we started working from home during the pandemic, our work lives and our home lives were kind of intermingled. When you go to school, it's self-contained, and the learning process is basically the only thing you do. Maybe there's some disruptive socializing, but that's natural. At home, you have maybe children who are trying to do school, parents who are trying to do work, and the family dog in the way. So it's not exactly a place where it's easy to focus. I don't know if you can hear, but I have like planes and birds and lawnmowers going on outside. It's not the best, but it works. Okay. Number 5, infection. So it is possible for people to manipulate information. I was talking today with students about how much Google knows about us and how much, if they wanted to influence our lives, they could. As far as I know, they have not. But a bad actor can exist, whether at a large scale level or a small scale level. So I call that infection. It's not easy to contain the spread of information from one country to another and so on. Okay, we already talked about credibility. So again, I want to hear your input on this point. What do you think about the advantages and disadvantages of internet education, downloading information into your own brain from the internet? I think I might have to call on Carol since she didn't participate during the last one.
Think, yeah, I think there's a certain scare factor to it. You touched on a lot of those in your listing here of 6 items under disadvantages that, for instance, Wikipedia, I think almost anybody can write whatever they want pretty much in Wikipedia. It might be right, it might be wrong. So as helpful as working through the internet for education, I think there's a place for it. And I think in the right setting and with the right actors who are dealing with it, it's great. And it's the future. I worked from home for 10 years on a complete, platform with the company I worked with. So I was loaded and locked in for 10 years working from home. So I know you can do it. But I always am leery about that sort of dark side of the internet. And, once you go off into Google and you go off to wherever it is, you're searching for information, some of it's good and some of it's not. And that's the scary part for me, is all that sort of bad information that's out there and some people with their motives behind that.
Yes, excellent point. I want to touch on that in a later slide. So thanks very much. How about Donna?
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
What do you think?
Just to tag a little bit on what Carol previously said, I think for me the biggest concern is not only misinformation, but also old information. A typical example is with the CDC right now, and you know, every ever so often, something is being changed as to what's the proper procedure or how to go about coping with the COVID virus. So in the past, well, first, I guess face masks were not such an issue, and then it was mentioned, and then it was like, well, do it, use it if you want to, and now it's like mandatory. So the changing information.
That is an excellent point. I remember thinking that during the COVID pandemic that, well, that's what they said before. What is the cutting edge now?
Right.
So we have on number 4 for advantages, cutting edge. That basically also means that information is replaced very rapidly, and it might be hard to tell. So maybe that's a blended one between advantages and disadvantages. Great idea.
I think one of the disadvantages of the internet too is that nothing ever dies. So old discredited information is still there as well as the update. So how do you decide what's real and what isn't? Because it never goes away.
Yes, excellent point. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on. This is our checkpoint. First, does anyone have any questions?
No.
Okay. Well, what do you think has been the greatest benefits of internet information on your life?
For me, it's getting information immediately.
True.
I can look up anything immediately, and I love that about the internet.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah, I love YouTube when it comes to some little thing I have to fix in the house.
Yes.
I just go right to YouTube.
Right, and makeup.
Tells me what to do.
Right.
So I mean, from that perspective, it's
Yes.
fabulous. You can find
Yeah.
answers to a lot of like goofy little things that before
Anything.
you might have had to call somebody to fix
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
you know, those
Yeah.
sorts of little things.
Anything. Yeah.
I recently bought a new phone, and when I was asking questions about how to operate the phone, I was told, oh, Google it on YouTube. There are lots of tutorials. So,
Right. Yeah.
and
Good point.
these tutorials are being made by ordinary people like you and me who have figured out a way to do something and have decided to share it.
Right.
Yes. So the ability to share good
Mhm.
ideas has increased rapidly.
Yeah.
But what about the greatest detriment, in your opinion?
Being led down the wrong path. For example,
Yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
go ahead.
we do not want to drink disinfectant to kill germs inside our body.
Oh gosh.
Don't drink the bleach.
Right. Don't drink the bleach. Don't inject it. Right.
Okay, so
Yes.
I'm concerned. Yeah. I'm sorry, Tim. Go ahead.
Well, thanks.
Go ahead.
I had an injury about 2 years ago, and it was, at the time, it was very painful. And because of the internet, I was able to obsess over information, and it became disruptive when working with doctors, because I had my opinion about it, and the doctors had a different opinion. Even if I thought that my opinion was sometimes better, because I saw a few, it was very frustrating. So emotionally, it was exhausting, and it took up a lot of my time.
Yeah. I can tell you firsthand, I worked in an operating room for 38 years, and what these patients saw on the internet and the fears that they had, and they were reluctant to do things, that was detrimental, very much so. Yeah, it was almost like they knew too much, and they looked down the wrong path. Yeah, but I want to tell you my thing about the internet, the greatest detriment. I'm concerned about the socialization of the kids, of the children. That concerns me so greatly, that they put everything out there, and the suicides and the lack of exercise, and they can't be without their phones, and it's too much. It's too much. Do people really talk to each other? Everyone's texting now. It's just, I don't know. It's a different time. I think as much as you can socialize over the internet, we socialized, I think, more without it at one point. You know what I mean? We were there in person.
True.
you know, to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But I'm concerned about the kids. That concerns me.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's easy to say things on social media sites that you would never say to someone
I
face to
agree.
face.
Right.
And
And then,
really, I've
Yep.
seen some really horrible things about that.
yes. Yeah. They hit that send button and it's too late. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's there
Yeah.
forever, you know?
Yeah, that's correct. I agree.
That's a topic we can develop.
Mhm.
Let's move on because we're not quite halfway, and I want to make sure we leave on time. So, going on to some of the difficulties of what the internet presents to us, I think basically it does create a good environment for determining what information or what course of action is the best, even with these competing ideas. Now, how that happens, I think I can present with this slide. So, deciding what's true on the internet. In my opinion, the tougher the game is, the stronger the players have to be. So it's true that there is a lot of confusion that can arise because of this, or problems with socialization, for example. At the same time, it just asks more of us. It might be beneficial because the heavier weight will make you stronger. Of course, there's natural and unnatural progression when you train, but I think as far as deciding what information is true, there's three considerations that now can be benefited. The first is your perspective is limited. We all see the world from our own eyes, from our own experience, from our own geography. When you are able to communicate with a lot of people on the internet, you do get to see things from many different perspectives. And you can consider, why does each party see the world this way? I think that will really expand your opinion about something, because you don't want to be wrong. You want the decision that you make to be the correct decision. And in fact, this reduces the risk. This reduces the risk of you having a blind spot because people are looking at it from different directions. Okay? So another principle, your idea and understanding are incomplete. And in my experience, I don't know it until I try to communicate it to other people. So I say here, it must stand up to strong selection. The selective force is basically just when I try to say this is what I think, the other person can ask me, well, what about this? And I say, well, you know, I didn't even think about that. Or you assumed something incorrect, and this is what my information says. I say, well, actually, now that you say that, perhaps I should think about this in a different way. So you ask yourself through this process, how is the idea, your understanding, and your ability to talk about it incomplete? I looked at the talking about it point because when I'm teaching the students English and we're having a conversation about world events, there's a limit on vocabulary. So maybe you have a feeling about what it is, and maybe you know what that feeling is in your native language, but to give it a name in the new language might be more difficult. It expands the vocabulary. But I'm sure that even in English, when we're talking about English, and we want to say, well, this is something. This feeling is, I don't know what name it is. If you expand your vocabulary, you allow yourself to be more clear about what exactly your perspective is. Okay, so final thing, fundamental psychological motivation. Looking at things from different perspectives, like why does this country want this result and why does this country want this result? For example, you consider what their goals are. And when you know what their goals are, you can perhaps predict how that affects how they present information and how it affects how information is received. So, with that in mind, because of the internet and the ability to discuss, I think a lot of ideas have to go through a crucible of communication. On one side, when we talk with others or when there's a listener, so when I'm talking with you, I can't just run away with my thoughts lazily. I have to be very careful with what I say, and it asks me to exert more mental energy. It's the same thing when you have a conversation. You can't just talk at a person. It's an exchange back and forth. So the real-time communication will require more mental discipline of the participants. So that, which occurs on the internet, that I think will be a benefit. Okay, so again, we must present our thoughts in a clear manner. Vague notions and fundamental assumptions don't fill the gap in the thought processes, because when you're communicating and someone doesn't understand you, you realize why. You had a vague idea about something, and now you have to put it into more clear terms. Or you had a fundamental assumption about something, which now this other person has information about, and you're like, oh, now my information is more complete. Okay? That exchange of information shows you your imperfections, and it checks them so that you can basically fill it out. Okay? And when you have agreement between many different people, probably that increases the probability of being right. Not necessarily. If I was a mathematician, I would say just because 100 mathematicians agree that this one theorem is true, but then someone proves it false, the majority is not relevant in that case. It's kind of an objective science. But in most cases, if we can have a larger group consensus, probably you have a greater chance of being right about whatever your opinion is. Those are my conclusions about that topic. So checkpoint again. What do you think about these points? Do you think that because there's more confusion that we can actually find a consensus about what is true? How about Wendy?
You can see I was contemplating that. I mean, I guess in one sense it might be harder to get to a consensus because, as you just talked about, you really have an opportunity to get different viewpoints on whatever the topic is that you're talking about. So yeah, I mean, it might be harder to reach a consensus.
See.
Not sure.
Okay. How about Britt? I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm muted because there's some background noise here sometimes that I don't want to disturb you with. What was the question again?
So, do you think that the confusion could result in the actual truth being found, or that in general there will be a chaotic result?
Because on the internet there's so many differing opinions.
Yes.
Yeah. It's I think, like your next point, who do you trust? You have to go to your trusted sources. You can't listen to, and you have to verify. You can't just accept everything as true that the minute you see it.
Excellent point. So yeah, let me ask that question generally. Who do you trust for information in terms of the internet? How about Carol?
Well, I feel like I trust less lately. You know, you look at the news sites, you know, so you can look at CNN, and then you look at Fox, and then you look at, you know, BBC, or maybe you're looking at NPR. Everyone has an agenda, and there's so much op-ed information that they seem to be putting out there as fact. It makes it very difficult to kind of figure out, you know, where the truth lies. So I just, right now, I think in this point in time in our country and everything that's going on, it's very hard. You try to go to, okay, where am I hearing the most consistent stories? And do they seem to be legitimate, you know, sources? And okay, maybe therein lies the truth of what really happened, kind of a thing. So I don't know. I think it's a tough time for that right now.
It's true.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully an amount of shrewdness will result where people always ask themselves, well, what do I believe about this? Taking all these facts together, what is their motivation? How is the information being presented? Who can I trust? And at the end of the day, what is my conclusion about the information?
Tim,
Yes.
my mother always said common sense was made before book. And I think in the midst of all this, we are being bombarded, you know, with a lot of information. But I think we each have an inner core, you know, that really guides us as to what is right and what is wrong. I think that's the best place to start from. And then using that as your foundation and your platform from which to spring forward, you can then look at certain information and, you know, also educate yourself. I think educating oneself is very important. And you don't educate yourself by looking, for example, I'm going to look on the internet how to make smoothies. Now, I'm not just going to jump on the first website that I see. You know, I'm going to keep looking until maybe the one I find, the recipe that I find has the ingredients that I have, or, you know, whatever. But you know, I don't think it's good to just jump on the internet and just, you know, go with the first piece of information that pops up.
Excellent
Also,
point.
yeah.
Please.
Another thing is that, well, I am a college student, and I always talk about looking at peer-reviewed articles, peer-reviewed platforms, you know, to verify your information. My professors, they do not want to see work from Wikipedia in my essay or in my research paper. But that still is a little point of concern, because recently we were hearing about a data set that was being used from which other authors or PhD graduates were writing papers. And they came to find out that the data set itself on which they were basing their research was wrong. So, you know, it's like, well, where do we go from here? But other than all of that, I think we are all smart, you know, and we are able to, you know, find our way in this maze somehow or another. And then we can always rely on each other.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Yes, when information develops quickly, even the expert institutions with peer-reviewed standards might be operating on something that's not verified
Exactly.
at the time.
Yes.
So let's move on to the final segment called Taming the Jungle.
Oh my gosh.
What was that?
Okay.
That's a surprise. All right, so we're going to talk about the tools in use by online universities and businesses, and I mean learning businesses. As far as I've seen at present, especially since the pandemic and some institutions moved online. And then we'll focus in on partnered education, which is very important for language learning. So we'll talk about the components and the progress we've made with our organization. And with that, let's begin. Okay, so the online systems of accredited institutions seem to use these 5 features. One is forums and discussion boards. So that's where you can have a controlled and moderated discussion about a topic. Usually the teacher presents a assignment where you must start a thread, as they say. You must start a discussion, and you must respond a certain number of times to other threads. So it's kind of a forced way to get that debate and dialogue going, but it seems to be in common use. The next item is completion-based progression, which means you can complete. It's basically maybe it's a training series where you go through a number of slides or videos, or you have to solve exercises during the process, and you might have 16 levels. So you can finish it at any time, probably before the semester ends, and at your own pace. But basically, this is kind of in contrast to a lecture style where you might be in front of, say, the teacher, and the teacher is just talking, but you tuned out at a certain point. With this completion-based progression, you have to go through the material and pass the checkpoint, which is solving problems usually. They also have video and text archives, which are accessible at any time. Probably you know about YouTube. YouTube is in itself a video archive, but these education institutions usually integrate supplemental videos to explain examples referenced in their textbook, or again, if they have that completion-based progression, they have a video archive and a text supplement. So basically, they're giving you the same information with multiple ways to access it, whichever is convenient for you at the time or whichever works best for your learning style. Right. Number 4, we have dynamic problem sets, which means that you might have an option to do training on their website, and it presents you with questions which are generated according to an algorithm each time, which is nice because you can't memorize what the answer is. The numbers will change, the words of the problem will change, and you can't complete it until you pass this question successfully. So, for an example, for my finance course, they had this kind of dynamic problem where they would give you a business situation with financial data, and you had to try to solve maybe the internal rate of return, how much you could expect this investment to profit you over a certain number of years. And if you didn't do it correctly, you don't pass it, it's shuffled back into the deck of problems until it shows up again and you try it with different words and different numbers. So basically, you're trying to remember what's the method and not what's the answer. So I think it works very well. Okay. Number 5, this is what we're going to focus on because it's important for language businesses. I know I said accredited institutions. Now I would like to say or general education businesses, because most language institutions are not colleges, it seems, though I know colleges do have them. So what they have is a scheduling and internal messaging system, which they use to arrange meetings. And they might present this either in a lecture style or a tutor style. The tutor style is the partner, where you have basically one-on-one. A point on this, it's feasible now due to the size of the market. There's so many learners, yes, but there's also so many people who are willing to teach, and they can be connected easily because there's no geographic limitations. That's just because of the internet. So also payment is probably easier. So we'll look at that. Just looking at that scheduling platform, the 3 key features are these. We'll start with number 1. Internal messaging. So if they have a website, usually there's a way to communicate within the website and you don't have to exchange an email, for example. It's a safe way for students and tutors to say, let's start chatting. Because if you give away your contact information, we all know, it could fall into the wrong hands. They also usually have an internal video call platform. Here, for us, we use Zoom, which is fine. But usually they have an alternative, which is within their website that you can access easily, because maybe someone doesn't have Skype or doesn't want to install Skype or Zoom. Then they don't need to worry about that. They can still serve their customer because it's built into their website. Okay. Again, you avoid contact exchange. When I learn Russian, I always have to use Skype or Google Meet, which means I have to exchange information. But I know there are English websites, like where I work, that it has its own internal feature, which is convenient. However, that said, they can't usually get it right, so it has more problems than Zoom, which has an army of technicians working on it. So as an alternative, it's fine, but usually the big companies are more robust, it seems. Okay, the final point is about payment. So that's not relevant for us, but I think it's very interesting. So system of contracting. That's between the users. There's two kinds of users, the tutors and the students, or the teacher and the student. And they can follow a lesson-based contract or a subscription-based contract. Basically, the company collects payment before there's any meeting between the students. If I'm using my website to learn Russian, for example, what I do is I exchange money for credits. So then I can use those credits to schedule lessons. And the teacher gets a message that this student wants such and such a time. Do you accept? Yes. And that forms a contract that we're going to meet at this time and fulfill a good language learning experience. Then you go to the lesson, and depending on the quality, or if it happens at all, maybe there's a technical issue, then you can affirm that yes, it happened, and yes, I'm satisfied, or no, it didn't happen, there was a problem. Only when there's a resolution that both agreed that there's been satisfaction is the money transferred to the tutor. So that's how that contract works. Oh, Michelle was here this whole time, and she was down on the list, so I haven't called on her. Sorry about that, Michelle.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, so maybe I'll have to ask you at the next round of questions. Okay. There's also subscription-based methods. I like this one because it actually seems to be more lucrative to the company and more lucrative to the teachers. So that's conflict of interest for me, but I'll explain how it works. As far as I understand it, I'm paid more for a lesson than the student pays for the lesson. So how is that possible? It seems that they get like gym memberships for more people than actually take lessons. So because they pay the subscription, but they don't take the lessons, they have a pool of money in that intermediary, because they're like the intermediary, and they can attract higher quality teachers. So they can give them a higher wage, because a lot of students don't fulfill what they plan to do. They wanted to go to the gym, they signed the contract for the subscription, but they didn't go. So that gives more money to the intermediary, and they can give more money for quality, which is kind of nice. So let's look at partnered education, which is, in my opinion, a requirement for efficient language learning, because language is for communication. If you don't include another person in your learning, probably your result will not be functional. I'm not saying 100%. It'll be a lot more difficult, and probably you will have strange habits, which will be difficult to correct. I keep passing around this story that I know students who've been in the country for 12 years uh, who still don't speak because they've focused on just details, like vocabulary, but they haven't dedicated the time to actually sit down and talk consistently. So that's a change that internet education is going to hopefully actualize. Now we have so many people who can sit down one-to-one and have an exchange of information. And when you communicate, you're using language for its purpose. Okay? You will train the clarity of your expression, your choice of words, the simplicity of what you say, and you'll understand if I say it this way, the person may or may not understand. So you have to choose very carefully, which is a good skill. There's sufficient exertion. We talked again, when I'm maybe memorizing this Russian phrase passively, that's fine. But again, it's not the same as being under the pressure of talking to another human. And if I don't have that pressure, my brain doesn't push itself as hard. So only with speaking will the student attain the result they want, it seems. Okay, and you get immediate feedback on mistakes. Same story as I always pass around, if I try and read Russian, I'm going to make 100 pronunciation errors, which I wouldn't even know about. Maybe I understand it. Maybe in principle, the word is recognizable, but only if I have my friend here with me to check as I'm saying it, will I actually have that immediate feedback, instead of maybe someday finally hearing someone else say it and say, oh, that's how it's said, and remembering it. So that's why partnered education is relevant, and how internet education facilitates that, especially for language learning. Okay. Before we move on, are there any questions at this point? Okay. So what do we already offer since we've had to make this rapid online transition? I think there's 3 principal resources. The first is we now are fairly expert at this external video call system, where we can present education either in the classroom or lecture style, just kind of like this. So we can have like a PowerPoint and do training or do a class, or we can have the individual tutor partner relationship, which, by the way, is what most language businesses offer. So this is basically as good as it gets, and I think it really helps our community. We're building this, but we're organizing resources and references, which tutors and teachers can take and use to make a better learning experience for their students. I don't think it would be practical for us to write our own book, but there's so many available resources on the internet that we can take a look at them and find the good ones and make links for them. So if you go to our website, we are building that archive, which you can reference. Okay. Another archive we're building is our video education. So as you know, we're recording this one, so I hope no one has a problem. If you do, just tell me. I'll edit your face out. We put this on YouTube, and people can reference this in the future. So we make the learning experience once, but then it can multiply depending on the number of views. So far, we've developed the system for training our volunteers to use video technology. Britt's one of our new tutor trainees. She's going to graduate tomorrow, right? Unless she doesn't show up. I don't know.
I'll be there.
And we've done the training. She knows how to use the main tools for teaching online, with screen share, with resources, with whiteboard technology. So basically that's all you need to hit the ground running and produce that world-class language experience. We're going to make more, and hopefully stuff that will educate the students also, though we want our volunteers to be prepared. Okay, it's available anytime. And again, like I said, we have, if you want after this, you can check out our YouTube channel, and we have that new tutor training. So what system of online education do we have? It's there if you want to see it. It's also on our website. Go to online training, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. So what we're looking to include, these are items from what we saw previously, what our academic institutions doing now, what our language business is doing. This is what we could include in our organization going forward. So one is that discussion board and forum aspect. That would allow all of us, if you have a question, to post it there, and as a community we can answer it, or the moderator can be responsible. Again, we have to develop that text archive, especially. The completion-based progression system is a little ambitious. Our tutors know that we work with the Challenger reading series. In effect, that's a completion-based system because it has volumes for each level of English. So if you finish one volume, you can go on to the next. However, that's still paper, not a problem, but if we have our own online system, we could have students enter at various entry points and go through our full curriculum. We'll see how that works out. So assessments is not something that we've done in the past, but I think it would be great to measure how well a student is doing at the beginning when they first meet us, and then how much their speaking has improved after a certain period of time. Okay, dynamic problem sets. If we could do that, that would be pretty cool. So for example, I showed this card before. That's the English, if you can see my screen, that's the English variant of a sentence, and it gives you two options for how to construct it. So I got this from the textbook. On the other side is the Russian. So basically, if you could, I'm sure it's possible. In fact, I know it's possible. If we could have a software that does the same thing coming from a language into English, I think presenting dynamic problems like that would be very helpful. Okay, and finally, maybe we can upgrade our scheduling and matching system. We've made partnerships between a tutor and a student, and it's always worked well. But there's no reason that we can't take that out of the office and put it into the hands of a scheduling system, which might be under the supervision of our office. But we'll see. So any questions? It's the last round. Always pay attention to what we can offer you and your students, because we'd love to hear it. If we have a forum, you can post it there, and I'll look forward to reading them.
I have a question.
Of course.
And so most of what you talked about today and most of the information with LVA right now is with teaching English as a second language. You do have some stuff on basic literacy, do you?
Yes, we do. In fact, at our previous board meeting, we talked about how we need to focus on developing that track.
Okay.
Because in my personal interests, I want to develop the literacy aspect also. Due to community popularity, we've focused recently on teaching English.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry if I came in with that focus. It's just it's the momentum. But yes, we are trying to expand.
So in the past, so I was with literacy volunteers in Stamford, and then with literacy volunteers in Norwalk when I moved there. And then I wanted to do it again, and now I'm with you guys up there. My student right now is for someone with basic literacy. It's very difficult teaching him because there are so many gaps in his knowledge, and it just has been difficult for me. Yeah. So I was hoping that I could find more something, with a little more guidance, a progression, like you said, like you talk about.
Yes. So let me write that down because we'll have our next board meeting and our next training session next month,
Okay.
and we can really emphasize the basic literacy needs
Yeah.
because I know it's difficult without structure to address something massive like full literacy.
Mhm.
So we'll have to talk about the entry points for that because I know a lot of the people we serve will enter at the beginning and not necessarily in the middle.
This individual is an English speaker, just not literate in English, and he wants to take the citizenship exam, but we cannot just open the citizenship booklet and read and understand. That is impossible. And even this the simple basic thing of writing a sentence, capital letters and full stops, so it has been challenging, and we have not met, actually the last couple 2 or 3 months because of life issues, but we have to get back there doing what we have to do.
Yes. Is he, well, actually, I was going to ask because maybe he was my student from the past. The first student I worked with this organization, similar experience. Originally, he was from Mexico, 62 years old at the time, and he lived here for a long time, maybe 40 years, but he never learned how to read and write. And we began with the handwriting and the alphabet,
Yeah.
and we drilled it
Yeah.
every time we met. So we drilled it, and after we perfected the shape of the letters, just by repetition, we started to do words that used the letters.
Yeah.
And it did work,
Yeah.
though it took a while.
Yeah.
So I know the beginning is possible, but again, if you just do the beginning where you can now form the letters, you still have a long way to go.
He is beyond that. He is beyond that level. I want to say, I mean, there are words that he can recognize. He can read to a certain extent. I mean, he has his driver's license, and he once had a thriving business, which he was able to run without, I don't know how he did it, without the writing aspects, being able to write and keep bills and receipts, and I'm not sure how he did it. So this is why it's difficult, because he knows a lot, but there are also lots of gaps. So that's where I am. Yeah.
Well, please update me. Let me see how fast I can prioritize that forum aspect, because if we could have a forum where people can come together, it would be great to share a lot of information.
And what's also great is that if you want to start from the very, very basics of writing the letters, and you progress from there, the thing about it is that you would have laid out a path where I can identify where I need to jump in. I may not need to be at the very, very beginning, but if we have that progression from the way you write a letter to the way you write a letter, like a letter of the alphabet, and that might be a cute name. Writing a letter and writing a letter, the last letter meaning an actual letter. Dear LVA, blah, blah, blah.
Wait, what is that? People do that? Who does that?
So when I look at that, I would be able to identify exactly where my student is, and I would be able to jump in on any junction there.
Excellent. All right. So sounds like a good plan. Any other questions?
Um,
Okay, so then we are all finished, and you're free to enjoy this lovely day.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Yeah, it was
you.
great. It was
It's my
great.
pleasure.
everybody have a nice day. I enjoyed it very
You
much.
too.
Yep.